Hi, everybody. My name is Molly Richard, and I'm a postdoc at the wonderful Center for Innovation and Social Science, where I do interdisciplinary research on preventing and ending homelessness, mostly in the US. So one arm of my research is focused on understanding and addressing racial disparities in homelessness. Black people are vastly overrepresented among those experiencing homelessness in the US. So nationally, Black people are 12% of the total population, around 25% of those in poverty, but between 40 and 50% of those who are experiencing shelter or unsheltered homelessness. And disparities like this persist in states and communities across the country, pretty much every single one. So like we heard from Tom earlier, decades of research, including his, has shown that homelessness is a housing problem. By looking at total homelessness rates across communities across the United States and looking at the structural factors that are associated with those rates, it highlights that median rent, vacancy rates, other measures of housing affordability largely explain homelessness. But the question I want to ask with you is, do racial disparities in homelessness vary across the country? If so, how? And if so, what explains them? Can we think about this just as a housing problem, or is there something else going on as well? And the way that I looked into these questions is looking at 260 urban and suburban communities across the US and pooling data from 2016 to 2020. So I'm going to start with the figure at the top. You can see from this that the homelessness rate for Black people in the US is much higher than for white across the regions of the country. For both white and Black populations, the highest rates of homelessness are in the West Coast. You can see that on the left side, followed by the Northeast on the right, if we're going east to west, left to right. But then we look at what, are there any differences between the rates between the South and the Midwest? Yeah, it's actually a different relationship. So among white people, there's higher rates of homelessness in the South than in the Midwest, but then the opposite is true for Black people. So then, you could start to infer on what those disparities might be. So I decided to look at what a rate ratio would be. So Black to white inequities in homelessness. So that's what we have on the second figure below that, and that will be the dependent variable of interest for the next slide. So where are the highest disparities in homelessness? Actually, in the Northeast US. So about 7 times the share of people who are Black are experiencing homelessness compared to white. And that's closely followed by communities in the West Coast, also around 7. And then not a small disparity, but smaller, actually quite stark, would be in the Midwest and South. So I looked at these disparities in a number of ways, but I'm just gonna highlight one simple finding. So I borrowed a measure of structural racism from Tufts medical researchers, Michael Siegel and colleagues, and they looked at a multidimensional measure of structural racism. And I found that about 1/3 of the variation in racial disparities in homelessness is explained by that multidimensional measure of structural racism. So this measure includes housing, education, employment, economic mobility, and criminal justice measures, so Black to white inequities across these domains. And I looked at a few standout variables. So there were the Black to white disparities in poverty, homeownership, and jailing and detention rates are the strongest predictors of homelessness disparities. And pretty much the implications of this are, yes, homelessness is a housing problem. It is also a racialized housing problem. It's also a racism problem, and evidence I'm hoping that this study can provide some quantitative evidence to support advocates, community organizers who are saying that we can't address homelessness without also addressing racism. Thank you.